Well, as business continues to struggle through labour shortages, the Australian government is set to boost the skilled migrant worker intake by 40,000 people each year. But the government is concerned about not attracting enough qualified staff for the many sectors crying out for more workers. Joining me live is the Nationals leader, David Littleproud. Thanks so much for your time. You're going to attend this job summit. Are you trying to distinguish yourselves from the Liberal Party at this point?
Oh, look, we are two different parties and it's important that we understand that, but we are a united coalition. The Liberal Party took the stand that they weren't going to attend, but we believe as a party that represents solely regional and rural Australia, we very rarely get our voice heard. We're the forgotten Australians, and it was important that no matter how hollow this may be, that we turned up and we prosecuted a case for regional and rural Australia. I take my job very seriously in representing regional and rural Australia and making sure that voice is heard, and as much as I'll have to hold my nose, I'm going to take this opportunity with both hands and try to get this government to understand they need to listen to regional Australians, listen to farmers and not just unions. And if they do that, then we can shift the dial for regional Australia, and that's what I'm passionate about, and that's why we took the pragmatic step to say that we'd turn up, be part of the conversation, but we'd be very interested to see how serious the government is in taking us seriously when they didn't even invite anyone from regional Australia, didn't invite us to start with. We're an afterthought.
Okay, well, let's look at this migrant issue as well. You've been talking about it for a long time. We know that farmers need more migrant workers. It was the same case under your government. Now we seem to have a figure that Labor's put on, an extra 40,000 migrant workers a year. Is that about right in your mind?
Yeah, well, obviously they'll have the modelling, but we've had our borders shut because of COVID, and we do need these skilled migrants to come in. And because we've missed those years, which I think from memory was around 150, 160,000 a year, we do need to make that up. And that's why it is important. So long as all these jobs are market tested for so Australians get first crack at it, and that was the principle that our government had, so long as that's maintained. But we're also saying as Nationals that there needs to be an understanding of the unique nature of regional Australia, and that's why on the weekend we called for not only the ag visa to be reinstated, but a regional skills visa that looks at those critical skill shortages and gives a pathway to permanent residency. We just don't want them to transient through. We want them to be the next generation of migrants out here in places like Winton that want to stay. And whether it's a chef, whether it's a mechanic, we think if you give them that pathway, you make them stay here for 4 or 5 years to have the privilege to stay in this great country. Invariably, they love it and they enjoy it and they don't want to leave, and they're not going back into cities being big burdens on capital cities. So we're asking for some pragmatism to understand the unique nature of regional Australia, and that's why we want to have our voice heard.
Yeah, absolutely. You say Labor has the modelling when it comes to whether that number is right, but isn't this figure almost exactly what the government handed down in its last budget?
Yeah, and that's what we're saying. Unless that's been updated, we're comfortable with it. So long as Australians get first crack at this, this is a pragmatic step, one in which we welcome. We think that it's one of a suite of measures that needs to be implemented, whether that's not just on a regional basis, but also we welcome the fact they're thinking about allowing pensioners to do more work, which was a coalition's idea. But what they've forgotten in that, unfortunately, are our veterans. I think our veterans deserve a crack. They've served our nation. They've been prepared to put their lives on the line for us, and I think they should be given the opportunity to do more work and without having their payments taken away. I think that's just the right thing to do for those men and women that are prepared to serve our nation. And I'd ask the government just to revisit that and not just allow pensioners, but look to our veterans as well. Okay,
that's interesting. So is this one of the main things you're going to take to the Job Summit? Because we know that Peter Dutton did put that on the table when it came to pensioners, and the government has not acted on it or shown any willingness to do so.
Yeah, well, we'll be talking about pensioners and veterans. I think the coalition was very strong on that to start with. We also think around the regional visa and the ag visa. If you don't bring the ag visa in, let me tell you, you're going to pay for this at the checkout because supply is going to go down and prices are going to go up. Farmers don't plant crops if they can't pick it, and that's why supply will go down and your price will go up at the checkout. We think that there should be a unique regional focus on unique skills, but have that pathway to permanent residency. We also think the extension of paying graduates off their HECS tax debt if they come to regional Australia. We started that with doctors and practitioner nurses. We think that there's an opportunity to extend that for other occupations like registered nurses if they come and work in aged care sector out in the regions and remote areas, but also pharmacists, childcare workers, those types of things that will shift the dial in bringing people to the regions, because the unique nature, while you might say you can bring migrants in, if you don't actually incentivise them to stay in regional Australia, they'll simply migrate to the cities and they'll put even more pressure. So we're just saying this government be pragmatic on that. We think that's smart, in also looking at HECS debts. And we think there's also an opportunity to continue to grow those regional university centres. I mean, I've got a little town called Dirranbandi in my electorate, and there's a young lady there who's 18 years old. She was educated at Dirranbandi and St George, and now she's studying nursing in Dirranbandi and is working part-time at the local hospital. She hasn't even had to leave Dirranbandi to go to the nearest university some 600 kilometres away. She's doing her university degree in Dirranbandi. That's the sort of unique nature that we've got to continue to invest in. We've started those regional university centres. The government can continue to expand them, but also put some pressure on the states. They've dropped the ball in terms of TAFE infrastructure and getting those skills of kids, even here in Winton, being able to do a skills-based education, and we need the state governments to step up on that. So it's a holistic. We're looking at the training, we're looking at migration, and we're looking at incentives and looking at regional Australia differently, and that's why the Nats want to be pragmatic and be forward-leaning in this job summit in putting practical ideas up that can be implemented if this government will accept them.
All right, Dirranbandi, great part of the world. Why would you ever want to leave? Good point that you make there, David Littleproud. Before I let you go, what was going on in the previous government? We now learn that Scott Morrison made himself, swore himself in secretly as the Health Minister, the Resources Minister and the Finance Minister. Why?
Well, I don't know. It's pretty ordinary as far as I'm concerned. The reality is you have a democracy and a cabinet form of government, then you need to trust that process and respect the cabinet. The cabinet room is the forum in which you articulate arguments and ideas and you get a consensus out of, and that's what you should trust. Those are questions for Scott Morrison, not for us, but it's disappointing. I had faith and confidence in the cabinet process, and I would have hoped that Scott Morrison did too.
Does this show that he didn't? I mean, he's the Prime Minister. Why would he need that extra power? Do you have any clue as to why?
No, and I'm not sure that the constitutional powers that he was trying to enact, such is what the cabinet process is under our Westminster system, and that's why I think it's pretty ordinary. We should have respected that process, should have respected the forum of cabinet to articulate and argue out ideas and policy areas and come to a consensus. So I can't answer that, and those are questions that Scott Morrison will obviously answer in the fullness of time.
David Littleproud, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for that.